Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through sources to pull out the key stuff you need without wasting your time.
And today we're getting into a really significant work.
Yeah, Jacques Ellul's Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes, came out in 65 but still feels incredibly relevant. It's known for being, well, pretty exhaustive.
Monumental, some might say. Definitely thorough.
Exactly. So you're here because you want that deep knowledge fast.
Yeah.
Our mission, unpack Ellul. What is propaganda according to him? How does it work? And maybe the most interesting part, why he thought it's actually necessary today.
It's definitely got some surprising angles, not just the usual take on propaganda.
Okay, let's jump in. Ellul's definition. It's quite specific, right?
It really is. The first thing to grasp is he argues it's not primarily about changing opinions flat out.
Right, not just convincing you of something new.
No, more about intensifying trends that are already there, sharpening the focus on certain things, and crucially, pushing people towards action.
Or inaction sometimes. Discouraging the opposition.
Precisely. Or pushing opponents into inaction, yeah. He even talks about propaganda's plural because it takes so many different forms.
Okay, and he makes this key distinction early on. Agitation versus integration propaganda. Can you break that down?
Sure. Agitation is probably what most people think of first. It's, fiery speeches, getting people worked up, aiming for rebellion or big disruptive change.
Makes sense, like revolutionary talk.
Exactly. But integration propaganda, that's different. It's more subtle. It's about making people adjust, fit into the desired social patterns, the accepted ways of thinking and behaving.
Ellul thinks that's the kind modern society really needs.
That's his argument, that our technological society relies on this integration propaganda to keep things running smoothly, and mass media, that's the engine that drives it.
So while we picture like a political rally,
Yeah, that's agitation.
Ellul's saying the constant low hum of advertising, lifestyle messages, that sort of thing, that's the real necessary propaganda.
Yeah, in many ways, yes, that's the integration type. Pervasive, necessary for conformity in a complex society. It's a pretty challenging idea when you first hear it.
It really is. So his view is much sharper than just, say, any effort to change someone's mind.
Oh, much sharper.
Yeah.
He points out definitions like ogles are too broad. You'd end up calling teachers propagandists or priests. Ellul wants to pinpoint what makes modern propaganda unique.
And definitions have shifted over time, haven't they? Especially in the U.S.
They have. Early 20th century, it was more focused on the psychological angle, like manipulating unconscious drives. Then it got, well, more complex as people studied it more.
Okay, let's talk about its power. There seems to be this huge debate.
Definitely. You've got on one side almost this belief in its omnipotence, like some communist thought suggested it could create a whole new man, completely reshape people.
And the other side.
Well, sometimes, particularly some American sociologists maybe tended to downplay it. More faith in individual resilience, critical thinking, that sort of thing.
So where does Ellul land?
It's nuanced. He absolutely believed in human importance, preeminence, but observationally, he saw humans as, quote, terribly malleable.
Malleable.
But, and this is vital, he insists you cannot understand propaganda by looking at it alone. That's a huge mistake he sees people making.
So it's not just the message itself.
No, it's connected to everything. The whole civilization, sociopolitical stuff, technology, our mental state, emotions. It's all interwoven. Studying it in isolation just doesn't work.
Okay, so within that bigger picture, what defines modern propaganda for Ellul? What are its core characteristics?
Well, first off, he sees it as a technique, one based on scientific analysis, psychology, sociology, understanding how people tick, what they desire, group dynamics, how masses are influenced.
So it's calculated, not just instinct.
Highly calculated. Without that scientific basis, he argues, it'd still be pretty primitive.
And who's the target? The individual or the mass?
Both. Simultaneously, that's key. It targets the individual within the mass and the mass as a collection of those individuals.
How does that work? Seems a bit contradictory.
Well, he argues that a truly isolated individual is actually less susceptible. It's being part of the mass that makes you receptive.
Yeah.
But the propaganda isn't just aimed at some abstract crowd. It reaches you, the individual, through your participation in that group.
Okay. And organization is critical too, right? You can't just have random messages floating around.
Absolutely essential. Ellul hammers this point. You need a structure. Control over mass media, planned campaigns, slogans, ministries of propaganda or information, whatever you call them.
And people trained to do it. Technicians of influence.
Exactly. Specialists in communication, psychology, sociology. It needs structure, planning, execution.
He also says it's always institutionalized. Like a machine, an apparatus, tied to real-world stuff, not just ideas.
Yes, that's fundamental. It's not just psychological tricks. The psychological part and the physical organizational part are inseparable.
What does that physical part look like?
It could be party structures that integrate people, organizing communities into cells, influencing economic policy, social structures.
Mm.
It needs a tangible foothold in reality.
And it has to be continuous, not just a one-off campaign.
Relentless, really.
No.
Constant, successive impulses. That's how you build reflexes, myths, the whole psychological environment, the prejudices.
And censorship helps maintain that environment.
Yes, often hidden censorship, he notes. Minimal, maybe, but enough to block out conflicting reference points. Protect the bubble.
Even talks about needing artificial agitation, even when nothing's really happening.
Yeah, to keep that climate of influence alive. To maintain readiness, you could say, keep people tuned in, emotionally engaged, even without an immediate crisis.
And the propagandists themselves, they're like technicians.
Pretty much. Operating within the machine, using calculated words. Elul suggests they don't even need to believe it personally in that moment. It's a job.
But the person receiving it, the propaganda, thinks it's genuine.
That's the goal, to make it seem spontaneous, sincere. The organization provides the consistency, the messaging discipline.
You mentioned sub-propaganda. What's that about? Sounds foundational.
It is. Think of it like preparing the soil. It's basic political education, like in Lenin or Mao systems. The goal is to create a whole new worldview, a Weltanschauung.
So that later, more specific propaganda seems logical.
Exactly. It fits right into the established framework. The demands seem natural, maybe even indisputable, because the underlying assumptions have already been systematically built up.
Okay, let's dig into the psychological side. Elul says propaganda can't just invent things in our heads.
Right. It's very hard for it to create something totally new or to overturn really deeply held beliefs or prejudices just like that.
So what does it do?
It has to connect with something already there, a need, whether it's a concrete need, food, safety, or a psychological one. Tests as propaganda often fail, he thinks, because they don't tap into a genuine need.
And it builds on existing societal beliefs, shared feelings, myths.
Absolutely. It thrives on those fundamental collective presuppositions, the unconscious judgments, the shared values, the powerful images or myths that everyone in a society understands. It has to reflect those existing currents.
Trying to go against the grain is basically pointless.
Highly unlikely to succeed, yes.
Hmm.
It needs that fertile ground of shared assumptions and myths to really take root.
Timeliness is also crucial, you said.
For explicit propaganda, yes. It needs to connect to what's happening now, what people care about now. It links those deep social beliefs to timely action.
And news plays a big role here.
A huge role. News provides the timely, often dramatic material that propaganda can use. It's like the visible manifestation of those deeper societal realities.
What about people on the fence? The undecided?
They're often quite receptive, Elul suggests, especially if they're concerned about fitting in with their group. Propaganda can leverage that concern for the collective.
So being integrated makes you more susceptible.
In a way, yes, because you care about the group consensus.
Right.
Isolated individuals, less easily swayed. And propaganda works best when focused on those big, shared societal concerns, foci of interest, he calls them. Technology, the economy, national security. Things everyone's talking about.
So intense collective life, whether natural or stirred up, makes people more open to influence.
That seems to be his observation, yeah.
Okay, let's tackle the big one. Propaganda and truth. The common idea is it's all lies, right? The bigger the lie.
Elul directly challenges that. He actually says that assumption makes us vulnerable.
How so?
Because if you assume it's always lies, you drop your guard when it does tell the truth or uses facts selectively. He acknowledges lies were common, especially in wartime. But modern propaganda in the U.S. or the communist bloc at the time he was writing often understood that discoverable lies hurt credibility.
So accuracy is often preferred.
Generally, yes, unless the truth itself is unbelievable or damaging, then maybe lie is strategically better. But often it's not about outright falsehoods.
So how does it distort things then? If not always lying?
By twisting the meaning of events, by insinuating false intentions. And a classic tactic, he points out, accusing the enemy of exactly what you yourself are planning or doing, projecting your own motives onto them.
Elul also insists propaganda isn't monolithic. There are different types.
Definitely. It varies hugely by regime, Soviet versus American, Hitler versus Mao, and different types can even exist side by side within the same system.
He starts with integration propaganda. We touched on this. Diffuse, Subtle.
Yeah, operating through the general climate, customs, habits, creating new standards of judgment that feel natural, spontaneous, but actually align you with the collective. He also mentions sociological propaganda, a gradual adaptation to a certain social order.
And you notice this figure in the U.S., the agitator, stirring things up.
Yeah, this kind of freelance nationalist, often tapping into the anxieties of groups who feel left out, using the American way of life rhetoric to push various prejudices, but not clearly tied to a specific party. An interesting
And
observation.
the opposite, almost. Propaganda of agitation. For revolution, big pushes.
Exactly. Used by governments or groups wanting radical change, overcoming resistance. It hits basic emotions, hunger, freedom, hate. Doesn't always need mass media. Pamphlets, speeches, rumors can work. Simple, direct, emotional.
And horizontal propaganda. Inside small groups.
Very different. This happens within tight-knit communities. Propaganda basically merges with education, socialization. It's total moral, intellectual, political, instilling belief and habits through group experience. Political education is key here.
And even just too much information can act like propaganda. That sounds odd.
It does, but his point is that an overload of data, even if accurate, can just overwhelm your ability to think critically. You retreat to simple judgments, ready-made opinions.
And propaganda exploits that.
Exactly. It exploits the problems created by the information glut, offering easy answers.
Okay, let's talk about the conditions needed for propaganda to really work. A mass society is fundamental.
Absolutely. Large numbers, people moving between groups, traditional bonds weakening. This creates individuals who are more available, more suggestible, more easily influenced by mass messages.
And within that mass society, you get these organic groups that depend on propaganda.
Yeah, groups whose whole collective life is shaped by propaganda. They become relay stations, spreading it further. Even older groups, like families or churches, he suggests, start using propaganda methods themselves to compete.
Public opinion also changes in a mass society.
Drastically. It's expressed indirectly, polls, media choices. It's formed by huge numbers of people relying on abstract symbols, often distant from their own lives. Very different from opinion in a small village, say.
And the role of mass media concentration. Newspapers, radio, TV in fewer hands.
Crucial. Allows for orchestration, continuity, applying scientific methods. Whether it's state control or private monopolies, that concentration is key. But, he adds, people have to choose to consume that media.
Which leads to that point about people seeking out media that confirms their views, wanting to be propagandized.
Yes, the mentality of the propaganda. We often gravitate towards what we already believe, rejecting things that challenge us. It's a kind of self-reinforcing loop.
Who's the main target audience, typically?
In the West, Elu thought it was mainly the broad middle class. People with a certain standard of living, some education, some stability. The very rich or very poor, he thought, respond more to direct agitation about immediate issues.
Adjustment is another key aim he mentions, getting people to fit in.
Yes, conforming to norms. Work, consumption, social life. He saw parallels between Mao trying to mold citizens and the pressures of McCarthyism, both aiming for a kind of normalcy, conformity.
And basic education,
Yeah.
paradoxically, makes people more susceptible.
His controversial point is that while it teaches reading, propaganda techniques advance faster than critical thinking skills. So education just creates a bigger audience for more sophisticated propaganda. Propaganda even starts claiming to be culture.
Propaganda also needs problems to latch onto.
Yes, it exploits existing issues or magnifies them, or even creates the perception of a problem, then offers its solution. It needs something to work with in people's minds.
And finally, it needs an ideological backdrop. Myths, big ideas.
Definitely. It draws power from those fundamental societal myths: progress, happiness, work, and big ideologies like nationalism, democracy, socialism. It needs that larger framework of belief.
Okay, now the really striking part. Ilil argues propaganda is necessary, not just something evil people do.
Right. He sees it fulfilling a dual need. The state needs it to govern, especially in democracies. And the individual. The individual actually needs it psychologically in our modern technological age.
Even if we consciously hate the idea.
He suggests we unconsciously crave it for stability, for meaning, to cope with the stresses.
Why does the state need it, according to him?
Well, in a democracy, the government needs public support. But public opinion can be fickle, uninformed. So the state needs to guide and shape opinion to align with its actions. Even just informing the public becomes a form of propaganda, arguing its case against other influences.
And it can even manufacture the appearance of public demand.
Yes, make it seem like the people are demanding what the government already planned to do. It legitimizes decisions. Think Castro's Day of Justice, or how issues were framed in Czechoslovakia, he suggests.
Okay, what about the individual's need? Why do we need it?
Several reasons. Modern work often feels empty, needing ideological justification beyond just money. Modern life is stressful, the pace, anonymity, we need motivations, frameworks to cope, and the sheer overload of fragmented information. We crave coherence.
So propaganda offers justification for our actions, our beliefs.
Yes, provides seemingly rational explanations, creates scapegoats. Ideologies themselves often function as justification.
And it simplifies things. Standardizes ideas, gives us patterns.
Exactly. Labels, slogans, ready-made judgments. It reduces the mental effort of figuring everything out ourselves.
Can it reduce tension, too?
Yeah.
By creating a stable opinion climate.
It can create that sense of security belonging to the consensus. But the flip side is closed-mindedness, intolerance of difference. It can even lead to a kind of neurosis, he warns, with rigid reactions and involvement in artificial conflicts.
He talks about alienation through propaganda. What does he mean?
Losing touch with your authentic self. Critical judgment gets suppressed. You live a more artificial life, obeying impulses that feel foreign because they've been implanted.
And it creates a need for more propaganda. A snowball effect.
Yes, through two processes. Mithridization, you get used to it, desensitized, need bigger doses. And sensibilization. You become hyper-responsive, reacting strongly, maybe irrationally, to even small triggers.
It can both politicize and privatize people.
Oh, seems contradictory, but yeah. It can whip up passion for politics, or especially conflicting messages or terror. It can make people withdraw, become skeptical, apathetic, privatized.
And its impact on institutions, parties, unions, churches.
Big impact. A party with better propaganda can surge, potentially harming democracy. Unions using mass media might become less oppositional, more integrated. Churches adopting propaganda risk diluting their core message to fit the medium.
And democracies need it to survive. That's a strong claim.
A very strong claim. He argues they need it to defend against internal factions and external threats. That in the modern world, propaganda creates truth, in effect, and democracies ignore its methods at their peril. He felt they'd suffered setbacks by neglecting psychological action, relying on weak PR.
Which brings us right back to the ethics. Can democracies use this tool cleanly?
That's the dilemma. Ideally, democratic propaganda should be truthful, based on facts, avoid manipulation. But simplification, highlighting certain aspects, that's unavoidable in mass communication.
Does he think democratic propagandists struggle with this?
He mentions the potential for a bad conscience and the importance of them actually believing their message. He brings up Laswell's idea. Democracy should aim for positive incitement, action from genuine feeling, not just top-down manipulation, contrasted incitement.
But using myths, even for good causes externally, can backfire internally.
Yes, myths tend to demand unity. So democratic myths aimed outwards can inadvertently create pressure for conformity and intolerance of dissent inside the democracy. He even talks about needing to maintain a certain way of life, sometimes using methods that look a bit like brainwashing.
And democracies maybe haven't always been great at using visual media, but TV's power is huge.
Historically, maybe less adept with film than authoritarian states, but TV reaching right into the home, mobilizing the individual totally. He saw its immense power, even for democracies.
So the bottom line on democratic propaganda.
It can spread democratic ideas, sure, but it doesn't guarantee true democracy survives, because true democracy needs critical judgment, choice, differentiation. Things propaganda, with its push for integration and certainty, tends to undermine.
Okay, that appendix on effectiveness. Sounds like measuring this stuff is really hard.
Incredibly hard. Illouz stresses you can't just compare advertising results to political results or domestic to foreign campaigns. The goals are too different. Even knowing who you actually reached is difficult.
And there's a time lag. Effects aren't immediate.
Often a big delay, the period of indetermination, makes it tough to say if something failed or just hasn't worked yet.
Standard surveys aren't much help either.
They have limits. They miss the deep sociological effects, the myth building. They focus on stated opinions, not intensity or underlying worldview shifts. Psychoanalysis might get deeper, but you can't survey millions that way.
And interpreting results after the fact is tricky. Like asking people about Nazi beliefs after WWII.
Exactly. Circumstances change, answers change. It doesn't tell you what they really thought under the full force of the propaganda.
We might see vote shifts or sales bumps, but proving propaganda caused it is tough.
Very tough. So many other factors are always involved.
Yeah.
Direct causal links are hard to establish reliably.
Elul was also skeptical of relying too much on math and stats here.
Yeah, he felt a lot of the important stuff just defies being reduced to numbers. Too complex, too qualitative.
What about the idea that too much conflicting propaganda just makes people tune out, become indifferent?
That can happen. Withdrawal. But Lou says don't assume that means it's ineffective. That sensibilization might still be happening, making people ready to act later. And he points to studies showing how resilient propagandized beliefs can be, like German soldiers' faith in Hitler, often reinforced by small group morale, which propaganda also influences.
He used the French in Algeria as an example.
Right. Propaganda worked somewhat on the French population, but largely failed with the Arabs. Why? Mediocre execution. Lack of a truly compelling ideology that resonated. Effectiveness depends on many things.
So ultimately, can we measure effectiveness accurately?
Elise says basically no, not with precision. We have to judge based on broader facts, general trends. The fact that politicians and businesses believe it's essential and effective is telling. Think about how rumors or fashion spread shows our susceptibility.
Time is a factor, though. Effects fade.
But direct effects might fade, yes. But long-term, total, technically superior propaganda can have lasting impact. Foreign propaganda usually faces more hurdle of suspicion, cultural disconnects, but the outcome is never guaranteed.
So wrapping this all up, Elul's core message is that propaganda isn't just some marginal tactic. It's woven into modern society.
Deeply woven, stemming from real needs, the state's need to function, the individual's need for psychological anchors in a complex world.
And for you, listening, wanting to understand these forces, Elul offers a pretty powerful lens, doesn't he, for thinking critically about all the messages swirling around us.
Absolutely. Which leaves you with a really crucial question to mull over. Given everything Elul observed, how do you navigate this constant flow? How do you maintain your own authentic thought and action?
Yeah, where is propaganda subtly working on you? Maybe in ways you haven't even noticed, shaping your views, your choices.
It's a challenging thought, something to keep in mind long after this deep dive ends.
Definitely food for thought. We really encourage you to explore Elul's work further if this sparked your interest. Thanks for joining us today.